Now, here's the thing with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Like I said, this is his 7th team in 6 years. He was drafted by the Saints, played his first 3 seasons in the NFL with the Saints. Since then, since 2021, C.J. Gardner-Johnson has not played more than 1 full season with any team. It was Philly, and then it was Detroit, and then it was Philly again, and then it was Houston for 3 games last year, and then it was the Bears, and now it's the Bills. Why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. And let's go back into the story at least about why Gardner-Johnson only lasted 3 days or 3 games with the Texans. There were a number of scheme issues. C.J. Gardner-Johnson was not connecting with the DeMeco Ryans defense. And it came to a head, week 3, game is 10-10, they're playing the Jags. And there's a cover 0 blitz on that's called. So Kamari Lassiter and C.J. Gardner-Johnson have the 2 receivers on the left. And the way the story goes, apparently, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was supposed to take the first receiver that went outside. Kamari Lassiter takes the receiver that goes, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was supposed to take the first receiver that goes inside. Kamari Lassiter takes the first receiver that goes outside. This is a very typical coverage in the NFL. Instead of saying man on man, I'm going to go where that man does. We're going to make it easy on ourselves. I got outside, you got inside, and whichever guy goes that way, you have him. And then there's other variations off of that. If both guys go inside, then one guy has the first man to go inside, and then the other man just takes the second guy wherever he has to go. But in this particular play, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was supposed to take the first receiver who went inside. He did not. He took the first receiver that went outside, and that left Kamari Lassiter chasing in coverage. It turned into a 46-yard play, which led to the game-winning touchdown on the next play, and then C.J. Gardner-Johnson was gone. This is a guy that quickly wears out his welcome. This is a guy that has been a problem in multiple locker rooms. He has gone to the Super Bowl twice with the Eagles, and both times the Eagles have said, thank you, but goodbye afterward. And this is a really good organization. Really, all of these teams that he's played for, Philly, Detroit, Philly, Houston, and Chicago. Chicago with Ben Johnson. These are all upper-level organizations in the NFL. All have taken a spin with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. All have decided he wasn't worth it for the next season, or sooner, as in the case with the Texans. Does this mean it won't work in Buffalo? I don't know. He also has clearly gone to many playoff games, and these teams have consistently that he's played for gone to the postseason. So that's a good thing. But what the most interesting part of C.J. Gardner-Johnson is to me is what it means for who the Bills are now. Because C.J. Gardner-Johnson probably doesn't fit in a Sean McDermott locker room. Sean McDermott, as we heard from the moment he arrived until the day he was fired, always valued the culture in the locker room. And this is not to say Joe Brady doesn't value it. But Joe Brady, I think, is showing you with C.J. Gardner-Johnson that he's willing to maybe take a few more chances with that culture. I don't think Sean McDermott would want Gardner-Johnson in his locker room, simply because he doesn't want the harmonious apple cart to be upturned. Now, sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes a little shock to the system helps. But this is how Sean McDermott wanted to operate. He wanted a locker room that did not have characters like a Gardner-Johnson. Joe Brady seems to be okay with that. Better or worse? I don't know. I'm fascinated. But it is the first kind of indication of how Joe Brady might be willing to run this locker room. I think the positive spin of the Joe Brady era, from what we've seen and how the offensive players at least have talked about Joe Brady, is that he is very much a player's coach. Guys get along with him. The offensive players could not wait for the Bills defenders to get a better look of what Joe Brady was as a person and as a coach. I think he's going to be open to more stuff. I think he's going to be more of a player's coach. As much as the players loved Sean McDermott, and there was nothing but the highest of praise for the type of locker room Sean McDermott operated when he was in Buffalo. But he was still kind of an old school guy. Remember, even Trey White this year was laughing about how Sean McDermott would open up the reins with some things, let guys be a little more free, how McDermott had transitioned from a guy who had a good culture but a guy who seemed to be more of a hardline, old school coach when he started into someone who was more open, more player friendly. And I think that transition is going to continue with Joe Brady, that Brady's going to go even further to the player friendly side. And that can be good. If you have veterans who are responsible for themselves, who can run a locker room on their own, who don't need the coach necessarily to be cracking the whip of discipline, then having more player freedom can make the locker room and the workplace essentially more enjoyable for guys to go to. And don't discount how important it is for these guys to enjoy the place they work. Think about where you work. Do you like being there? Probably some places you did more than others. The ones you like going to, you probably did a better job at because you were in a better mood when you got there. That's not anything different that happens in an NFL locker room. So this can be a good thing. Now, on the flip side, the negative part of it is you get to a point where the inmates are kind of running the asylum. And if guys are doing whatever they want and getting outside the rails of discipline, well, then you got problems. And CJ Gardner-Johnson is a guy who will operate outside the rails of discipline to the point where he even understands it. I got a kick out of listening to his press conference where he said, you know, I'm kind of a guy that toes the line. I know how to go up to the line. Sometimes I'll go over the line. CJ Gardner-Johnson knows who he is. And at age 28 in year, I think 7, it's going to be for him. He's very familiar with how he operates in the NFL. And I respect that, even if it can rub some people the wrong way. D'Amico Ryans apparently being near the top of the list. Again, it's not necessarily better or worse. We'll find out if it's going to be better or worse. But sitting here right now, it's just going to be new. And the fact that the Bills are embracing a guy like Gardner-Johnson, or at this point just signing him, I don't know how much they're embracing him, is fascinating. Because no matter what you thought of Sean McDermott, one of the things that was unassailable about the Sean McDermott era in Buffalo was the locker room culture. The players consistently talked about how much they loved the guys and how important it was to play for the guy next to you. You saw the number of players who would leave and come back, leave and come back. That speaks volumes. I say in the NFL all the time, don't listen to what people, players or coaches say, listen to what they do. And players who played in Buffalo for Sean McDermott wanted to come back for more. And it was going to be a difficult piece of navigation for the Bills going to a new coach. What do you do with a locker room culture? Because this is something that everybody loved. But Joe Brady can't just go in there and run Sean McDermott's culture. There's nothing that an NFL player or any professional athlete will see through faster than trying to not be who you are. Joe Brady's going to have to be who he is. And that means a different culture than Sean McDermott. And from what we've seen from the players who talked about the Sean McDermott culture for 9 years, topping that was going to be really hard. So how does Joe Brady go about doing that? Well, I guess if you want to make a conclusion from CJ Gardner-Johnson, there's going to be a little more openness, a little more ability for players to maybe push the boundaries of what is appropriate in a locker room. And I think, it fits Joe Brady, who he's been so far. So again, you want a coach who's going to be authentic. This, to me, feels authentic for Joe Brady. I don't know if it is, but it feels that way. And 2, this is still largely a veteran team. Josh Allen, number 1, runs the locker room. He's the guy. He's the leader. He's the one everyone answers to. But it's not just him. Deion Dawkins is very much a locker room lawyer. And that term can be used a number of different ways. In this way, he is a guy who's in charge of that locker room. And both of those guys are high character guys that are going to keep teammates in line for the most part. And you've got Spencer Brown, Connor McGovern, offensive linemen who have been there. Khalil Shakir is getting to that point. Dawson Knox you can put. There's enough veterans, certainly on the offensive side of the ball, that you're not dropping CJ Gardner into a rudderless or railless locker room. This is a locker room that can probably handle a guy like Gardner-Johnson. Seeing if it actually works out that way will be interesting. No matter what, I can sit here and tell you about a coach's plan or his culture. If he loses 3 in a row, all bets are off. But this is, at least, like I said, an interesting window into what appears to be the Joe Brady take on what his locker room is going to look like. And I've thought a few different times that Sean McDermott's choir boy approach to building a roster can be limiting. And a guy like Gardner-Johnson, like I said, is probably off the table. Not anymore, apparently. Does that make it better? I don't know. But it is going to be fascinating because it's a new era. And Joe Brady, going back to the combine, made it clear this is not year 10. This is year 1. This is a new era. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is part of that new era.